This is horrendous. I've never seen anything like it. It's huge, it's scary.
Al-Qaeda, the prime suspect tonight after nearly 200 people are killed by a bomb in Bali. At least 2 Britons are dead, 40 injured, 25 missing. The Foreign Office says do not travel to Indonesia unless it's unavoidable. Good evening, this is Channel 4 News. The official number of dead is at least 182, but that number will probably rise according to the Balinese authorities. It's not just a tragedy for the families of the victims, but it's a body blow to the island's tourist economy, and it could signal that Al-Qaeda are back. As Australia evacuates its dead and wounded citizens, its Prime Minister calls it a terrorist act. Also tonight, wanted, not a person yet, but a large white lorry. US police in the Washington area desperate in their search for the serial sniper. And from Peru, a special report on the victims of forced sterilization. 1/3 women could have been affected by President Fujimori's policy.
On the other headlines tonight, kicking out the racists. Slovakia faces disciplinary action over the abuse aimed by fans at England's black players in last night's European Championship qualifier. And my kind of town, Paula Radcliffe smashes the marathon world record in Chicago.
Well, until last night, the island of Bali conjured up images of palm-fringed beaches and exotic romance. But after the events of October the 12th, it will indelibly be linked with the most horrific bomb attack in Indonesian history. Almost 200 people from around the world have been killed, including at least 2 Britons, and it is feared that the number will rise with dozens of people still unaccounted for. No group has yet admitted planting the bombs in Bali's popular resort of Kuta, but Al-Qaeda is the chief suspect. Our correspondent Ian Williams reports from Kuta, and you may find some of the pictures in his report disturbing.
This is horrendous. I've never seen anything like it. It's huge, it's scary.
The horror and the chaos, captured by an Australian tourist moments after the explosion.
People are burnt everywhere. There's an LPG container, there's people dead, there's everything. Our parents are going to be freaked. Thank God I'm okay, thank God Jill's okay. I just don't believe what happened here tonight.
It was nearly midnight when the bomb exploded in a car parked outside the popular Sari Club. It triggered a huge blaze as gas cylinders ignited and the flimsy roof collapsed. Scores of young people, Australians, Europeans, Indonesians were trapped. The lucky ones emerged, stunned from the heat and flames. Many of the dead were burned beyond recognition. But it was only in the morning that the full extent of the destruction and the carnage emerged. Rescue workers continued to bring out body bags containing the remains of those dug from the gutted and mangled wreckage of the nightclub. It seemed an endless task. Bali's main hospital was struggling to cope with the wounded. More than 300, almost 1/3 said to be critical. Many had horrific burns. Lists were drawn up in an effort to discover who'd survived and who might still be missing. And the lucky ones recounted the horror of the night before.
There was all fire around me. I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't see anything. I had blood all over me and I got out. I jumped through the fire.
Indonesia's president, shaken by the bombing, visited the site and said she'd cooperate with international efforts to fight terror. The US and Indonesia's neighbours have accused her government of being slow to respond to the terror threat. A threat that's now been unleashed in full fury on this, one of the world's most popular tourist destinations. And Kuta was where the liveliest nightlife was to be found. The scene all around the Sari Club is one of utter devastation. A scene that 28-year-old Briton James Woodley wanted to see for himself. Yesterday had been his first night in Bali, part of a round-the-world trip. He'd been on the dance floor when the bomb exploded.
I heard what I thought was a gunshot outside. I saw people running, and the next thing, there was just the most incredible explosion, and the whole place had collapsed. I was lying on the floor.
How'd you get out?
I somehow saw a gap above where I was lying, and I just managed to crawl through a hole. And I came out. There was flames everywhere. It was incredible heat, and I just ran across the top of all the iron and there was burning bamboo and burning straw. Just horrific, really. And those people I was in there talking to, the place I was sitting, I'd gone onto the dance floor right in the middle of the club about 20 seconds before it blew up. If I'd stayed in my seat, there's just no way, because it was just under so much burning metal.
Well, this evening, this holiday island, which has been regarded as an island of tranquility in turbulent Indonesia, is in a state of shock. The National Police Chief has described this as the worst act of terrorism in Indonesia's history. And the President, who's been accused of dragging her feet over terrorism, now vows to get those responsible. As the sun goes down, a religious ceremony unfolds where the Sari Club had stood. Bali's a largely Hindu island in overwhelmingly Muslim Indonesia. It had a reputation as a safe and welcoming place. A reputation now brutally and hideously undermined. Ian Williams, Channel 4 News, Bali.
Well, now, just before we came on air, I spoke to the British ambassador in Indonesia, who is now in Bali. I asked him about the latest death toll.
Yes, I'm afraid there are now about nearly 200 bodies, 180, 200 bodies, who've been pulled out from the wreckage of the street and the two bars which were attacked. And on the British side, it's still only one or two absolutely confirmed dead, but I'm afraid there are at least 5 or 6. It's quite difficult to get complete confirmation in terms of identifying bodies and things, but we're pretty sure there are 5 or 6 people. Now, much more worrying than that still, there are still about 25 people accounted for, British people, some of whom were seen in the bars and around there very shortly beforehand. Others who may have gone off and done something quite different and not reported back to their hotels for other reasons. But we're afraid that figure of 5 or 6 dead is going to rise quite considerably still.
Right, so your immediate advice would be, if you're a Brit, you're in the area and you're okay, what should you do?
I think keep away from places where all the foreigners congregate. Eat in your hotel. Don't go out to bars and restaurants. That must be the advice for people here in Bali, as it is really for people elsewhere in Indonesia at the moment.
The more wider advice seems to be to stay away from not simply Bali, but Indonesia completely. Would that, in your view, be overstating the precautions necessary, or would that be quite reasonable?
No, that's the advice we put together this morning with the Foreign Office in London, because clearly anyone thinking of coming to Bali should postpone their visit for the moment, and anyone thinking of going elsewhere in Indonesia, if they've got urgent business, that's one thing. They may well decide to go ahead and do that. But if they haven't got urgent business, if their visits can be fairly easily postponed, they should do that, because what was done last night could be repeated, and we're not making a prediction, but it's quite possible it would be repeated in any one of a series of places around the country.
The British ambassador speaking to me from Bali. Well, now, the immediate assumption was that Al-Qaeda had carried out the bombings, but should be so swift, perhaps, to jump to that conclusion? And in the wake of such a terrible attack, why are George Bush and Tony Blair still focusing on Iraq as the biggest threat to world peace? Here's Peter Morgan.
No warning and no admittance of responsibility. The Bali bombing bears all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda and its allies, the latest in a series of attacks linked to the terror network. Al-Qaeda's thought to have secret cells in over 60 countries, and Indonesia, with 220 million people spread across 300 islands, is a perfect hiding place. prime suspects for last night's attack are the radical Islamic groups who want to turn Indonesia's secular republic into an Islamic state. The attack could have been carried out by Laskar Jihad, a militia group which has attacked Christians, as has the Jaffa Umat Talib movement. But one group is widely thought to be behind the Bali attack, Jamaah Islamiyah, who allegedly have long-term links with Al-Qaeda. Earlier this month, Channel 4 News met the spiritual leader of Jamaah Islamiyah, Abu Bakr Bashir. The CIA claims Bashir's spiritual war against the West is matched by his deeds, but Bashir denied any connection with terrorist activity.
Give me the proof. Show me the evidence. Let the CIA themselves come and show me what they've got.
This might actually be carried out by a small group who are not necessarily directed by Al-Qaeda or Bin Laden, but who wanted to take some action in sympathy. It could actually play against Al-Qaeda and not for them, and it probably will galvanize the Indonesian authorities into taking stronger action than they have in the past.
But the Indonesian response, like that of Western governments, may be limited. President Megawati Sukarnoputri's coalition government depends on the support of Islamic parties who will oppose direct action against groups like Jamaah Islamiyah. And despite today's promise to get tough on Islamic extremists, President Megawati fears that could tear the country apart.
In 2001, there were 30 major terrorist bombings in Indonesia. And in that whole period, there were only 5 people arrested for possible involvement in those bombings. So Indonesia has a long way to go before it can claim to be responding to terrorism effectively.
Others have linked the Bali car bomb to the recent explosion on a French oil tanker off Yemen and the murder of a US soldier in Kuwait, all signs that Al-Qaeda or groups inspired by Osama bin Laden are still active. Critics fear too much time is being spent worrying about Iraq when the real threat is elsewhere, a charge Britain denies.
The fight against terrorism and the fight against states like, or the battle with states like Iraq, which defy the international community, are not alternatives. They're part of the same battle.
But is this a battle being fought on too many fronts against too many enemies? A battle which, as last night's attack shows, may never be won.
Peter Morgan reporting there. Well, I'm joined here by Dr. Kirsten Schultz from the London School of Economics, who's an expert on Indonesia's Islamic militants. Dr. Schultz, good evening to you. The Western media, and indeed some Indonesian authorities, pretty much putting Al-Qaeda in the frame tonight as the chief suspect for this. Reasonable or hasty?
Well, I think it's a bit early to tell who is behind the bombing, but if we look at the modus operandi, local Indonesian groups have so far never attacked tourists directly, and they have never used car bombs. The attack in Bali was quite a sophisticated attack, and most of the local radical groups have not proven capable of such action so far.
Right, and as Ian Williams pointed out in his report from Bali, Bali itself quite outside the normal realms of the kind of political violence which we've seen in other parts of Indonesia.
Oh, it's definitely. Most of the political violence in Indonesia, apart from the capital, has been in provinces where there already was tension previously between Muslim and Christian communities, and radicals have gone in to defend Muslims there. Bali doesn't have a significant Muslim community or a significant Christian community for that fact.
Would that, in a sense, make it vulnerable to the idea of the theory that it's a group like Al-Qaeda? The fact that it is a predominantly Hindu island would in itself make it more of a target?
Well, I think it probably would, in the sense that it's the island where most of the Westerners go for purposes of holidays, and also where you would then have these sort of associated immoralities going on from an Islamist perspective. And it's also the economic center for Indonesia. It's the one part of Indonesia which has not collapsed over the last couple of years and is absolutely vital. Right,
now the British ambassador speaking to me earlier there, he also said, characterizing Indonesia as a whole, he said these Islamic groups, hardline groups, very, very small, not representative, and very much resented by the vast majority of Indonesians. Is that quite true?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're talking about a nation which is over 90% Muslim and probably about 89% are moderate Muslims. Their Islam is not like it is in the Middle East, and they're certainly not represented by any of these radical groups. But the radical groups are loud. They have committed atrocities, for example, in the Spice Islands, and they have captured the imagination of the media, and therefore they seem to dominate the picture of Indonesia, but it's not a reflection of reality.
Right, now very briefly, hit Bali, you hit the tourist economy and you hit the international airlines. That makes it quite a vulnerable target in that sense, doesn't it?
Well, it's also undermining directly the current Indonesian government, an Indonesian government which is cooperating in the war on terrorism.
Kirsten Schultz, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Well, elsewhere now, before we go on elsewhere, I should of course give you the Foreign Office number which has been set up, a phone line for people who are concerned about any relatives in the area of Bali where the bomb detonated. The number is 0207 008 0000. That is 0207 008 0000. And that number you can also find on the Channel 4 News website and teletext page 360. Elsewhere now, police hunting the Washington sniper have released a wanted poster, but in a sign of the slow progress of the investigation, it shows not a suspect, but a large white lorry seen by witnesses at more than one of the shootings. The gunman has now shot 10 people, killing 8, but as with last weekend, he has not struck since Friday morning, leaving nervous but determined residents to try to get on with their lives as normally as possible. Our correspondent in Washington, Gabby Rado, reports.
It's 8:52 at News Talk 630 WMAL. We can report a quiet night. And
despite that, the radio stations in the Washington area still considered their own sniper story was more important than terrorism in Bali in terms of the news agenda.
The Montgomery County Police have released a composite drawing of a white box truck, which they say was seen by witnesses.
The pictures they released of the type of truck in question had enough detail to include light damage to the rear bumper on the right-hand side.
After working diligently with victims of this case, these are the graphics that have been prepared. It has been modified, it has been retouched, and it is very close to what the witnesses tell us from their memory.
However, a different vehicle had been reported driving off from the scene of the latest killing in Fredericksburg, Virginia, a white minivan with a roof rack, and the police were due to release a picture of that later.
Don, you're on the line from Rockville.
All quite confusing for the general public, some of whom have been calling into radio stations to suggest their own theories.
Quick, could this be some guy who's just lying in wait, waiting for a white truck to show up before he shoots?
That these are crimes of opportunity. In other words, somebody is not picking out a victim. They are picking out a spot and waiting for the moment.
It's at petrol stations where 4 of the killings have taken place that the alarm is most obvious.
We're helping out with the police department today, so we're going to be pumping people's gas today.
The Guardian Angels, who normally patrol underground trains at night, have surfaced in a few places to help the nervous fill up. You are nervous?
Yes.
So what are you going to do about it?
Hurry up, get my gas, get in my car, and go where I'm going.
It's kind of unsettling to the nerve. I am conscious of my environment, and I am pretty much aware. I'm kind of noticing things.
Once the petrol flowed, he played it safe.
I'm going to wait inside.
Outdoor barbecues marked a home fixture for the Washington Redskins American football team today. Their stadium is near one of the past week's sniper shootings.
It makes us concerned, and we try to get a spot where maybe he or she can't see us and get in a hole someplace.
Doesn't seem to put people off.
Not really. I was a little scared getting gas this morning, though. Kind of running around, you know. Didn't want to stand still.
Generally, everyone's aware that they're taking a small risk by coming out here in a large open public space, but call it the American way, call it football loyalty, there's no sign that they're intimidated by the sniper. Gabby Rado, Channel 4 News at the Washington Redskins Stadium.
Now for a look at some of the day's other news, here's Bridget.
The European Football Authority, UEFA, has begun an investigation into the racist abuse of England's black players last night's European Championship qualifier against Slovakia. Against Emil Heskey and Ashley Cole throughout the match may result in a fine against Slovakia's Football Association or other disciplinary action against the national team.
Back on home soil after their match against Slovakia, England's win tainted by the violence and racism that dominated the game. Already the Football Association has lodged an official complaint with UEFA in what's becoming an all-too-common occurrence at European grounds. Almost from kick-off, Emil Heskey and Ashley Cole Cole had to put up with a torrent of racist abuse from Slovakian fans. Heskey later said he had been aware of it, but had just tried to concentrate on the game. Already this season, Cole, Patrick Vieira and Thierry Henry were subjected to this kind of treatment at Arsenal's Champions League game in Eindhoven, with Henry appearing to be pelted with missiles.
The fact is that on the continent, throughout Europe, this sort of abuse will be taking place week in, week out. It's endemic. And one goes to games in Italy, France and Spain and expects to hear monkey chanting directed at black players. And I don't think that in those countries they've got an internal dynamic which picks up the issue, then looks at what action needs to be taken.
England has led the way in Europe on anti-racist campaigns in football, but now fans and players will be waiting to see if UEFA uses its muscle to punish Slovakia, and thus sending a strong message to other clubs that this sort of abuse will no longer be tolerated in the game.
Victoria MacDonald reporting. And allegations of indecent assault against the Manchester United manager Sir Alex. And the couple who made the claims may themselves face charges by South African police. Sir Alex in South Africa to investigate a possible link-up between his team at a football academy in Pretoria had accepted a lift back to his hotel from a local jazz club by the woman involved, who then accused him of squeezing her thigh. Sir Alex said the woman and her fiancé had made false claims in order to sell a story to British newspapers. Paula Radcliffe has won the Chicago Marathon and world record by a minute and a half. She ran the course in 2 hours, 17 minutes and 17 seconds, beating the record holder into second place. It's been an amazing season for Radcliffe, who won her debut marathon in London back in April. She took gold in the Commonwealth 5,000 metres and European 10,000 events, and is also the world cross-country champion. And from one record breaker to another, Michael Schumacher completed his Mirabilis with victory in the Japanese Grand Prix. It was the 9th Ferrari 1-2 of the year as Schumacher led his teammate Rubens Barrichello across the finishing line in Suzuka. Finland's Kimi Raikkonen snatched the third podium place for McLaren. His teammate, Britain's David Coulthard, was forced to retire early with mechanical trouble, leaving him a disappointing 5th in the Drivers' Championship. But it's Michael Schumacher who has rewritten the record books. This was his 5th driver's title, equaling the record of Juan Manuel Fangio. It was his 64th career win, easily the most by any driver. And his 11th of the season, beating the record he shared with Nigel Mansell. His points total this year, 144, is the highest ever. It put him a record 67 ahead of his nearest rival. And he's the first driver to finish on the podium in every race of a season. And a look at the weather now, and the satellite shows cloud across most of the UK and heavy rain in the southeast. No change overnight, those heavy showers causing flooding in places. Temperatures between 6 and 10 Celsius. Drier in the south tomorrow and brighter weather spreading eastwards, but the rain still falling elsewhere and slightly higher temperatures. Over the next week, northern parts should see some dry, sunny days with the risk of the odd shower, but low pressure will bring unsettled conditions further south.
Thanks, Bridget. After the break, state-sponsored programme of family planning or a campaign of mass sterilisation aimed at the culturally and economically inferior. A special report from Peru on the fate of 300,000 women sterilised against their will on the orders of the Fujimori government. Welcome back. Now it's a breach of human rights on a staggering scale. The new government of Peru claims that its predecessor, under President Alberto Fujimori, ordered the mass sterilisation of more than 300,000 women under a programme aimed at curbing the growth of what it termed the culturally and economically inferior. The new government has still not published the full report of its investigation into the programme, but in a special report for Channel 4 News, Juliana Rufus has been to Peru to meet some of the victims and one of the doctors responsible for carrying out the operations.
The village of Mawaypamba, home to 600 Quechua Indians in the Andes Mountains. In this tiny village, as many as 35 women say they have been either tricked or forced into sterilization.
They grabbed me. They threw me on the trolley. They tied me up like this. They stretched me and tied my hands and feet to the trolley.
Rudusindra Kwiawamang was one of the victims of former President Fujimori's family planning campaign. Launched in 1996, Fujimori said it would stamp out poverty.
They said to my husband, if she does not get sterilized right now, the police will arrest you and you will get sterilized instead. I saw a lot of cotton and toilet paper with blood on the floor. They grabbed me, tied me down. They injected me with an anesthetic. They had knives in a bowl, and while I was watching, they started cutting my stomach.
A special investigation by Peru's present government estimates that between 1996 and 2000, more than 300,000 women were sterilized against their will. And we uncovered this rare footage, which shows how Fujimori sold sterilization to health workers. Rafting, holidays and all-night parties were just some of the perks for those who met the high government targets. The government hasn't published its full investigation and refused to show us the report. But we obtained a copy, and I discovered that the family planning campaign was part of a secret military operation called Plan Verde. In the report, anonymous military sources claim the plan was used to exterminate Peru's poor through mass sterilization.
We've managed to track down a military source ourselves. He lives about 4 hours out of Lima, and he's agreed to give us an interview about this.
A military band would go. They played and everybody danced. Then the doctors would set up the tents, and they would invite the patients in for medical control. And slowly they convinced them that they were just going to check them up. And at that point, sterilization took place.
And the report revealed why. It says, the need to stop the growth of the population has been demonstrated, and so has the need to treat the existing population surplus by mass sterilization of groups which are culturally and economically inferior. I asked our source if it's true that mass extermination really was the goal.
Yes, it's completely true. They spoke a lot about the existing surplus. It makes me really sad.
Fujimori has publicly denied the report's allegations, but congressional investigator Hector Chavez says he's set on bringing brave charges against the former president.
We have more than enough evidence to call things by their name. Genocide. It sounds brutal, scary, yes sir, but that's what happened here.
I caught up with the doctor responsible for the sterilizations in Maiwapamba. I found Dr. Washington unconcerned about the report. He still defends what he says was a legitimate family planning campaign.
There are women who are very satisfied and thankful for what was done for them. They can now educate their family. They have fewer children, definitely, but they live happily.
We spoke to one woman called Rudusindra. She said her husband was threatened with jail, and she herself was tied up and forced into a sterilization by you.
God, it makes me laugh. Excuse me, but I laugh because she doesn't have a case. If I have to operate in the operating theatre, I wear gloves, and I have a mask on. I can't touch anything but the instruments I use to operate. Do you see?
Dr. Washington is now running for mayor, campaigning under his nickname Wachi. While his eyes are set on a promising political career, the women in Maiwapamba have a bleak future. Entropia Kwiawamang says that in her village, a young woman who can't have children is virtually worthless.
At the medical centre in Anta, the doctor said to me, People like you are having children like donkeys. Why don't you do anything about it? My husband is now throwing me out of the house and tells me, "Get out, you piece of garbage." He has started hitting me and kicks me in the stomach. He even kicks me in my wounds.
The government has promised to bring those responsible to justice. But so far, only those who've been forcefully sterilized are living with the consequences.
Juliana Rufus there reporting from Peru. Which brings us to our main headline tonight. The death toll from last night's bomb attack on a Bali nightclub is now stretching towards the 200 mark tonight, with more than 300 injured. The British ambassador in Indonesia told this programme that 5 or 6 Britons may have died, and possibly many more. That's it. We're back 7 tomorrow. Till then, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.